All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are jumping into a really thought-provoking academic paper by a researcher, Dr. Alejandro Mendoza. What he does is he takes one of the most famous political slogans of our time and flips it on its head, looking at it through a whole new lens of labor, demographics, and some pretty wild future tech.
You know this phrase. We all do. It's been everywhere for years. But what if there's a whole other layer to it? This paper argues that this idea has, kind of quietly, morphed into something completely new, a version that the author says is a deeply paradoxical vision for the future.
So, the author actually coins a term for this, MAGA 2.0. And he argues this isn't about looking backward at all. He defines it as a tecnonationalist project, one that's all about keeping America's global power by using a very specific 1-2 punch. Highly selective immigration on one hand, and a new industrial revolution driven by AI on the other.
And this gets us right to the core puzzle of the paper. The author points to what he sees as a huge contradiction, a fundamental conflict at the very heart of this idea. It's a project that says one thing out loud, but, according to his analysis, actually depends on the complete opposite to even work. Okay, so here's that conflict laid out bare. On one side, you've got the public message, right? It's all about restrictive immigration, about being self-sufficient. But on the other side, the paper argues, is the structural reality, an economic and demographic dependency on a steady flow of migrants just to keep the lights on.
So why? Why does the author claim this dependency is real? Well, he argues the answer isn't really in politics. It's in the numbers. It's in the demographics. Let's take a look.
Now, according to the data in the paper, there's this really key difference in birth rates. The rate for the native-born population is at 1.5. For the migrant population, it's a bit higher, 1.7. Now, that might not sound like a massive gap, but the paper argues it's absolutely crucial. It positions the migrant community as this key demographic force that helps offset an aging population.
And it's not just birth rates. It's also age. Get this. The average age of the migrant population, according to the study, is just 32 years old. And that youthfulness, right there, is what the author identifies as a vital stabilizer for the entire economic model he's describing.
Okay, so if this group is a structural necessity, then how does the system actually use them? Well, the next part of the paper argues that this workforce is valued almost entirely for its function, for what it does. And you can see that reflected in their working conditions. The paper zooms in on what it calls precarious work. You know, jobs that are unstable, low-paying, with few protections. And according to the data in the study, a staggering 65% of the migrant workforce is in these kinds of jobs. The author's point is that this isn't some accident. It's a core feature of the system.
And if you look at a critical sector like agriculture, the picture gets even sharper. That number jumps to 72%. The author uses this to argue that this is a systemic, unequal way of plugging people into the economy, one where the risks and costs are pushed onto a workforce that's kept deliberately unstable.
But here's another paradox the paper points out. The data suggests that 58%, more than half, of the migrant population is actually overqualified for the job they're doing. Think about that. That points to a massive systemic waste of skills, of education, of human potential.
So to explain this, Dr. Mendoza puts forward this idea he calls cognitive peripheral capitalism. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the concept is pretty straightforward. The system, he argues, actively imports brains, educated, skilled people, but then it deliberately parks them on the economic sidelines in subordinate roles. It basically unplugs a worker's skills from their actual job and status.
And this all leads to the final and, frankly, the most startling part of the paper's entire argument. If you've built a system that relies on a functional, disposable human workforce, what happens when you don't need the humans anymore?
And right on cue, here comes automation and AI. The author issues this really stark warning that this technology is being set up as the ultimate replacement for that disposable labor force. And this, he says, is setting up a huge collision between the dream of robotic efficiency and a potential new fiscal nightmare.
It all boils down to this simple, powerful line from the paper. Robots don't pay taxes. I mean, think about it. When you replace a human worker who pays into the tax base that supports everything with a machine that doesn't, what happens next?
So the paper lays out this potential domino effect. Step 1.
Automation replaces human jobs on a massive scale. Step 2, the human tax base, the money that funds our roads, our schools, Social Security, it starts to erode. And step 3, the final domino, the public systems that rely on that money start to weaken, creating this huge fiscal instability.
So, let's pull all this together. What are the big takeaways from Dr. Mendoza's analysis of this techno-nation?
Well, the author's final conclusion is pretty stark. He argues that the narrative of national greatness he's describing is actually built on a foundation of managed, intentionally unequal human labor. It's a system that needs a young, overqualified workforce that functions through what he calls selective precarity, and that ultimately requires a subordinate other just to keep itself going. And the paper leaves us with this final, really powerful question. It pushes the whole argument beyond just one country or one political idea, and it forces all of us to think about a fundamental question for our future. In a world where productivity no longer requires people, what is our value? Definitely something to chew on.